This is a re-review on Panicky Percy because I'm not all happy with my original review on the episode anymore. I will admit back then the episode rubbed me the wrong way, and not to mention I accused it of treating anxiety as a joke, despite the surprisingly good moral about not letting your imaginations getting the better of you or letting it run wild like mad. I also should have known better not to get so worked up over an episode like that. And I also should have known better than to call Percy out over a panic attack about Thomas not being at Knapford. Whereas I think a harsh punishment would teach him not to waste the other engine's time would be deserving for him, but turns out to be a real dick move and came off as unnecessary, harsh, and cruel of me. Not to mention, I should not have said that just to make all kids or people that have a panic attack about something feel bad about themselves in the first place. But does this re-review mean I am beginning to like this episode or consider this one average? Average? No. Grow to liking it? Sure as hell no. I will be fair though, my rewrite posted on DeviantArt back in 2019 was not any better. In fact, the way it was written was too mean-spirited, badly executed, and it also made me an asshole without thinking twice. I had to delete it because, like I said, it was badly executed, mean-spirited, and the ending was flat-out shallow and harsh. Okay, the ending is what made it shallow and harsh, not just mean-spirited. Another thing I should have known better was that friends were supposed to support each other, and not point the finger or scold over a panic attack that was either a simple mistake or a complete misunderstanding. So yeah, a punishment would not do any good at all. At the time, I wanted to unleash my anger about this episode, mainly because of how it rose my rage in every problem I had with the episode. Every time I looked into Panicky Percy a few times, the problems I had never got better. It was not a good choice for me to make myself raging and swearing at the episode. I decided I should re-review the episode after watching the video explaining most of the problems my review had. I did not review this episode in a calmer manner, because I was left with blind rage without even caring. Now, don't get me wrong. I still don't like this episode and made out some very good points in my original review, but the way I spent out my whole time yelling and raving at this episode was not worth the blind rage. I am not making this review like I want some sympathy. Yeah, I wouldn't even stoop that low. I am re-reviewing this episode because the original review was poorly handled, and the way I was with Percy was really unfair no matter how pissed off I got with this episode. Now with that all out of the way, I am now reviewing Panicky Percy for the second time starting right now. The plot, in my opinion, is a mess. I am nothing against the concept of engines letting their imaginations run wild, as it was well handled in other episodes like Percy's Big Mistake and Chucklesome Trucks. I can understand where they were going for, but the way it was handled here is poorly executed, and was left a mess in many areas that could have easily been avoided. I know Percy can worry about Thomas being in the snow, and that's fine by me. But one thing that really bothered me is the way I felt this episode really showed signs it ignored his character development from Tale of the Brave. In a way, it was handled in a rather silly, but also in a really over-the-top way in my eyes. I felt it as really forced, annoying, and unnecessary. I felt that it did little to not much justice for him from what I looked into the episode again. I also forgot that he's already learned about not jumping to conclusions or letting himself get the better of him by making up silly stories or letting his imagination run wild before. In a good episode like Percy's Big Mistake from Season 8, Percy is worried the Fat Controller would scrap him because he was late one time too often. But it turns out in the end that Percy was working too hard on the railway, and so he would carry the mail train all week. In the end, he learns never to make up silly stories, or in this case, believe in silly stories ever again, and becomes a much happier engine in the end. But here in this episode, the main plot feels rehashed from the past Season 8 episode, except it's made mostly different from Percy's big mistake. Percy completely loses his mind and jumps to conclusions by believing Thomas is in trouble because Thomas was not in Navford like he promised. What should have happened is that he would have asked the Fat Controller where Thomas is, and wanted to tell him why because he was worried about Thomas not being in Knapford, like what I just said earlier. That would have made the episode more, at least acceptable either way in my book. Or what about Percy looking for Thomas, or asking any of his friends if he saw him? I know it doesn't make the episode look or be any much better, but to me, it would be at least something that wouldn't need to rehash a certain Season 8 episode. But no, copy and paste and waste the potential concept from said episode and just make him excessively paranoid as possible. There is no reason for him to get that paranoid. I understand this is meant to teach kids something, but this statement I said really proved how maddening it is to talk about such lack of continuity and consistency to Percy's character development in the Andrew Brenner era. So can we have at least some consistency and continuity to Percy's character from previous seasons or specials, and keep it that way? That would be very nice. Also, this sounds nitpicky, but to get the cat out of the bag, why not have Peter Sam or even Nia herself be the perfect characters to be the main role? It would have been more better if this episode wasn't a rehashed Percy's big mistake, in my opinion at least. For Peter Sam, with him being on the narrow gauge railway with Sir Handel, he would be the perfect choice. Like Percy, he is prone to being naive. As for Nia, her experience with snow in China made sense because when she was being attacked by a large avalanche, she would have been destroyed to it and be wrecked, or in this case, end up dead either way. I know the story can have good qualities like the memorable crash in the episode, but even though I like the crash in that episode, in the same time I ask, why the hell would Percy's driver and fireman not get out of his cabin time for the crash and be out after the crash? They would have been physically injured or worse, dead to it. This rubbed me the wrong way than Percy's inconsistent portrayal. Okay, both rubbed me the wrong way, but this was worse than I could have ever seen. I know that this has happened before in Trust Thomas, Dirty Objects, Middle Engine, and most commonly Snow. These weren't really too much of bigger issues in my opinion. But here, this is just ridiculous. And not to mention, judging by how they never got physically hurt or killed from that crash, it is completely illogical and comes off as just frustrating. Frustrating to the point it drove me up the wall. It's the same stupid thing with James to the Rescue. That episode may have one of the best crashes in Thomas the Tank Engine history, but in the same time, James's driver and fireman did nothing to prepare for the crash. So how the hell would they have been able to survive a crash that can kill them? Even if Toby rescued both Gordon and James, I'm pretty sure their crews were still found dead either way. But back on topic. It really shows they need to use the engine's crews as the voice of reason, and not the exact opposite direction. That was the episode where I got really sick of the engine's crews being stuck in the engine's cab doing nothing other than driving the engines. And I am also sick of them not being given that much attention as they had in previous seasons. I don't really mind lack of realism in the show, like in Henry's Forest or Rusty to the Rescue. 2 of these episodes are great, but if it comes off as either ridiculous or frustrating or nonsensical, I just don't buy it. And whilst it is great that Henry appears in an episode once again, that I'll give that a pass, but in the same time, he hardly says anything other than get a roll where he laps with the other engines in the end of the episode. I guess it is logical that he laps with the other engines in the end of the episode, and Percy himself laps too, but all in all, at least 3 or 2 lines for Henry would have made the episode a bit better. But no, since they did little for him, that's really disappointing. But okay, on to the good qualities once again. But with the crash aside, the moral, like I said, does show letting your imagination run wild makes matters worse. And although was never said in the moral segment, the same can go with why jumping straight to conclusions is not a good idea. I know it was never said in the moral segment for the episode, but they should have also added that in the episode too. Also, as pointed out from NWR 1991's Thomas Review Station on his review of the episode on Blogger, I can agree that Gordon's thinking about Thomas is a nice mix-up of character for him, where he isn't the occasional boastful and arrogant jerk he is. So credit goes to him for pointing that out. Oh, and there was James puffing up to wonder what was going on. That I give credit for the shot resembling the bigger engines trio. I almost forgot in my original review, that is a very good reference to the classic series seasons and the early Railway series books for that matter. That was an at least solid way to show that in the episode if you are knowing what I am meaning by this picture. That was about it. There were the only 3 good things this episode gave us, despite me nitpicking at some of the good stuff. And that's about it. So overall, what can I say more? It may not really be as bad as Percy and the Monster of Brenham or Percy's New Friends, or any of the crap I would put up with seasons 12 to 16 to some of you, but the overall presentation of Panicky Percy was what really gets me back then. But now, how can I rank the overall episode as of 2020? Originally, I ranked it to 0.5 out of 10 in my original review as an abysmal episode. Yeah, because of the blind rage I went through. But now, it's getting bumped to being a 1.5 out of 10, meaning it's ranked as an episode that's beyond terrible. What a mess. Within me re-reviewing the episode as of 2020 and getting rid of that god-awful rewrite last month, I would likely try to forget what frustrated me with the episode and remember what the episode did right. So I will recover myself from this one and talk about something a tad bit better instead.